Did you know that complaining is bad for your health? Literally, it can make you sick. It can literally drop your immune system and you can become sick from it. This week on Behold the Savior, we're going to take a look at the ancient Israelites and study and see when they were complaining, it had grave consequences. The good news is we can learn from their mistakes and not repeat them. Stay tuned for Behold the Savior. Thank you again for joining us on this week's episode of Behold the Savior. And as I've already said, did you know that complaining is bad for your health? Moses, when he was leading the Old Testament Jews out of Egypt, was greatly blessed. They experienced the 10 plagues, and they were preserved through that. They walked across the Red Sea on dry ground, no less. The Lord split it. They walked across it. And then after that, they were protected by day and night. You see, by the night, they were guided by a pillar of fire that would light the way and that would also keep them warm in the desert. The temperatures can plummet during the nighttime. There's no humidity to lock the temperatures in. During the day, they were guided by a cloud, a pillar of a cloud, and that would give them obvious protection from the sun. And in light of all of this, not everybody was happy, to say the least. Moses led a great number of people, but you know what? His greatest adversaries wasn't the Pharaoh. It wasn't the Egyptians that were running after him. The people that caused the greatest stress on him was his people, God's people. I'm going to tell you about a rich man. There was a rich man. He had so much money. He had money in the billions with a B. He had so much money. He had this fantastic house, great house. It had all the toys you could possibly want in a nice house. And he had this great pool in the backyard. But he was a good man. He said, I want to do something good with my money. I'm going to have a house party. I'm going to invite all my friends and everybody over that I know. And I'm going to give one person anything, absolutely anything that they ask for. So the night came, they had the party, the people were coming over, and at this party, he was making his great announcement. He said, I'm so thankful and grateful that you all were able to come here, and I would like to offer one person anything that you ask for. All you have to do is jump into that pool, swim to the other side, and get out. When everybody looked over to that pool, what they saw was sharks, they saw alligators, there was snakes, and everything in the pool, everything in the water that has sharp teeth. Well, about the time he was finishing the sentence, he heard this splash. And he looked over and he couldn't believe it. Everybody, their jaws dropped. They were watching this guy swim through the water. Man, he was going 100 miles an hour. He was swimming around the sharks and trying to go under the crocodiles and evade the snakes. And they all watched intensely. They couldn't believe someone was actually doing this. Well, he made it to the other side and he got up. And just about the time he was getting up out of the pool, everybody was silent. You could have heard a pin drop. And the rich man, the owner, he looked over at him, he walked over and he said, you, sir, are the bravest man I have ever seen in my entire life. I'm a man of my word. Anything that you want, it's yours. You name it. And the guy was still catching his breath and the adrenaline was still pumping. And he said, well, I tell you what I want more than anything right now is the name of that person that just pushed me in the pool. You see, unfortunately in life, sometimes we're pushed into that pool. Sometimes we trip and fall into that pool. Sometimes we jump into that pool of our own bad mistakes. But in this instance, Moses was sort of being pushed around by the people that he was called to lead. Let's take a look at Numbers chapter 11, verse 1. Now, when the people complained, it displeased the Lord, for the Lord heard it, and his anger was aroused. So the fire of the Lord burned among them and consumed some in the outskirts of the camp. Complaining is bad for your health. And it's not that God got to the point where he can't take it and couldn't take it anymore. He saw what it was doing to Moses. All of these things they had experienced, and all they could do was complain. Well, it wasn't only Jews, it wasn't only Israelites that came out of Egypt, but there were also Egyptians. This was known as the mixed multitude. And even though they were now free, not under the rule of an Egyptian leader, an oppressive leader, now they're free, but they wanted to go back into slavery. They had been fed manna. God sent them food to sustain them. In fact, 6 days, it was a miracle. 6 days this manna would fall, and they would go out and they would pick it up, collect it, and it would be enough to satisfy. The Bible says it was enough for the fat people and it was enough for the skinny people. Everybody would have enough. And then on the 6th day, there would be enough that would be held over until the 7th day. You see, on the Sabbath, that 7th day, they didn't go out, they didn't work, they rested. So it was a double miracle, because any other day, if they tried to keep it over, the food would just rot and turn to worms. But on that 6th day, God preserved a double miracle. He fed them and He preserved them. But the people, they began to complain. Oh, we're so tired of the manna. We want to go back into Egypt where we had the leeks, the onions. We had all the food that we were used to, and the meat. Oh, boy, do we miss the meat. They were being ruled by their stomachs. God got to the point where He says, fine, you want meat? I'm going to give you the meat. So He sent quail to come in. There was a mighty wind, and it blew in the quail, and there was so much quail they could have as much as they could possibly ask for. But God essentially said, you're going to have this, but it's going to be at a cost. There are going to be many of you who will, as you're eating, you will die before you even get a chance to swallow the meat. Well, there must have been a plague, or the meat must have been infected somehow, and the prophecy was fulfilled that many of the people that they were eating, they died before they could even swallow the meat. Complaining is bad for the health. Not only that, but we can see it in the life of Miriam also. Miriam, Moses, and Aaron. Let's take a look at this. Numbers chapter 12, verse 1. Then Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married, for he had married an Ethiopian woman. Now, we want to understand, why would they be complaining about this? Why did Miriam and Aaron complain? Well, there were a few reasons, and we're going to take a look at those nicely, but let's just remember the whole concept of this is complaining is bad for the health. Let's see some of the excuses that they would have come up with, the reason for complaining. Number one, Moses' wife's name was Zipporah. And though she was a descendant of Abraham, she thought circumcision was barbarous. I mean, imagine that you marry into this family now, and they have you cut off the foreskin of the male child, and it just seemed barbarous. She didn't understand the concept of it. Well, Moses, they had one child that was circumcised and one child that was not. Moses was following God and he was obeying, except he didn't obey fully. Both children should have been circumcised. And it got to the point, but because of that disobedience, he could no longer be used by God. So his life became in danger. And Zipporah, she couldn't stand to see her husband in this condition. She knew what was going to take place. So she pulled out a stone knife and she circumcised her child and threw the circumcised portion at Moses' feet, said, "You're a man of blood." And she was upset. Now, she did go through with what God asked her to go through with. She did it begrudgingly, but God still accepted it. So Miriam and Aaron and Moses, all three of them prophets, Moses and Aaron priests. So Miriam, she's upset that there's this person that's come into the family that she doesn't get our ways. She's not used to this, and it leads to problems, to say the least. Another one is that Moses acted on counsel of Jethro, and that's Moses' father-in-law, Zipporah's father, without first consulting Miriam and Aaron, and jealousy thus ensued. Now imagine you're Moses. Imagine you're in charge of these millions of Israelites who have no real organized leader, and he was the judge. So there would be people coming to him constantly to have him judge and take care of these issues, oftentimes very trivial issues, as you can as you can imagine. So he started to get burnt out. It started to weigh on him. Probably started to get to the point where he didn't know how long he could put up with this. So his father-in-law, Jethro, counsels him. He said, no, you're doing it all wrong. You're doing it all on your own. You need to have other people. You need to delegate responsibility. So appoint this people to be in charge of this many people, and those people are in charge of this many people. So it started to become organized, and evidently it was a fantastic idea because Moses jumped on it, acted on it, took Jethro's advice, but never consulted Miriam and Aaron. Now, the problem is that Aaron and Miriam felt that they were called, they were separated by God, and they were to a point. But let's continue before we attack that a little bit more. Also, they tried to claim that Moses violated the principle of non-marriage with a heathen. You see, it was very well known that a person should not marry outside of the religion of the one true God. So she was an Ethiopian, but actually she was still a descendant of Abraham, so she still had that lineage in her. So all of these things are, maybe she had some good points on some of them, but it was just reaching for straws, so she was looking to complain here. And I keep putting the focus back on Miriam because in that verse 1 there, chapter 12, verse 1, it lists her name first, and here's the problem with that. Number one, it was a patriarchal society. They never listed the woman first unless there was a reason for it. Number two, even in the Hebrew language, the wording there, it's feminine to support that she was the one ultimately that was organizing this complaining. And we're going to see that even more outlined clearly here. Let's go to verse 2. So they said, "Has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also, and the Lord heard it?" See, as I've said before, they were set apart. In fact, Micah 6:4 says, "For I brought you from the land of Egypt. I redeemed you from the house of bondage. I sent you before Moses and Aaron and Miriam." But here's the thing. They were all set apart for a specific purpose, to convey specific messages from God. But of the three, Moses was set apart even beyond them. Somebody had to be called to be a leader. Somebody had to be called to make decisions. And God chose Moses for that role. In fact, in Deuteronomy 34:10, it says that Moses was set apart for this special leadership role. Let's go to Numbers chapter 12, verse 3. "Now the man Moses was very humble, more than all men who were on the face of the earth." Humility is the mark of a good leader. Now, this is not something that Moses learned easily. This is not something that he was born with. In fact, when he was raised up for 40 years in Egypt, and one thing led to another, and he committed murder. He ended up running into the wilderness, fleeing from his sins, and then he was in the wilderness there for 40 years. It took him 40 years to unlearn what he had learned in 40 years in Egypt. So during this time, God was shaping him, he was molding him, he was calling him to be a humble servant. You see, a good leader needs to be one that is willing to lead when no one else leads. A good leader is one that's willing to make decisions that are the tough calls to make. But a good leader also is someone that can admit that they're wrong when they are. A good leader is someone that can call for the support of other people. Moses was doing all of these things. This is why God chose Moses as a leader. Verse 12, "Suddenly the Lord said to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, 'Come out, you three, to the tabernacle of meeting.' So the three came out." I can just imagine, it's like three kids that they were all fighting and bickering, and the parent says, "All right, get over here, you now." "Then the Lord came down in the pillar of a cloud and stood in the door of the tabernacle and called Aaron and Miriam, and they both went forward." Now, why the tabernacle? Why does he come down in a cloud? The whole reason that the tabernacle was set up, the Bible specifically says it was set up so the Lord could dwell with his people. So he comes down in this cloud. He wants to be among these people. He wants to be among Moses, Miriam, and Aaron. And remember, he's got a great plan for them. He knows what they're capable of. They're capable of greatness. They just need a little bit of adjustment at this time. Numbers chapter 12, verse 6. Then he said, "Hear now my words. If there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, make myself known to him in a vision. I speak to him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house." God here lays out the method of how he uses to speak with his people. And a prophet, he uses visions, he uses dreams. But he says, look, Moses was different. He was different than you guys. I spoke with him face to face. He says he's unique in my entire house. Now, this is in Noah's time. It says that Noah and all his house entered into the ark. All his house were saved. That was his immediate family. Here, God is in his sanctuary, his tabernacle. That's God's house. But what he's addressing here is Moses among his house, all of his people, the Jews. Not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. Verse 8, I speak with him face to face, even plainly, and not in dark sayings, and he sees the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? See, Moses had this special connection with God. And God is calling out those that are speaking against leaders that have been specifically appointed by God. You see, this wasn't addressing just one bad situation here. What this was God making an example of this sort of mentality. Let's continue here. So the anger of the Lord was aroused against them, and he departed. And when the cloud departed from above the tabernacle, suddenly Miriam became leprous, as white as snow. Then Aaron turned toward Miriam, and there she was, a leper. Can you imagine? Now, this isn't the only time that a member of their family was leprous. Moses, when he was in the wilderness, when God was speaking with him, he needed a sign. He was commissioned to go into Egypt and be a tool to free God's people. And as a sign to prove that God is who he says and he can do what he says he can do, God made Moses' hand leprous, and then he removed the leprosy. So Moses knows, he probably has an idea of what's going on here. So Miriam, she was leprous. Now notice it's only Miriam and not Aaron that receives the punishment. It seems like Aaron is along here sort of by guilt by association. And listening to someone complain can be just as bad as doing the complaining yourself. So if someone's coming to you complaining about somebody, you need to say, you know what? I love you. You're a good friend. I don't want to hear you complain. If you want to talk, I'm happy to talk, but I don't want to hear you complain about this person. You need to go to that person and figure it out. Became leprous. Verse 11. So Aaron said to Moses, O my Lord, please do not lay this sin on us in which we have done foolishly and in which we have sinned. Please do not let her be as one dead, whose flesh is half consumed when he comes out of his mother's womb. Now, leprosy meant religious persecution. Leprosy meant being separated from your family, being separated from your loved ones. And all the evidence shows here that Miriam was immediately inflicted with the most severe phase of leprosy. You see, people didn't just lose limbs and things from leprosy. They didn't just fall off. What it does is it attacks your nervous system. So God gave us the feeling, believe it or not, of pain. Pain can be a good thing. Well, imagine you're walking and you bump your hand off of a table or something sharp and you've got a big cut in your hand. You feel it. You can address it. You can give it attention and allow it to heal. Well, a leper doesn't have those sort of feelings, so they get hurt, something gets cut open, they don't know to give it attention, it gets infected, and you get the point. They often go blind because, a speck of dust or something gets in their eye. They don't feel it. They blink, keep scratching their eye, gets infected. They go blind, lose their vision. Very absolute dreaded disease of the Bible. So God chose to use this as an instrument of his teaching here. And Aaron is now pleading for Moses to do something about it. Numbers chapter 12, verse 13. So Moses cried out to the Lord, saying, "Please heal her, O God, I pray." So Moses is pleading with God. Now, you have to take the example of Moses here. He could have easily said, "That's what you get, Miriam. Those other guys, they complained. They were burned up outside the camp. Good for them." They could say, the others, they were complaining, the mixed multitude, they were complaining about the food that God provided for us. It wasn't good enough for them, and they choked to death, or whatever it was that they died from. Good for them. Miriam, you've been complaining about me and about my wife. Good for you. You deserve it. Somebody may bring somebody into your family that maybe you don't think they're the best person for that family. Maybe you're even tempted to complain about this person or a friend or something. And how Moses reacted sets a great example for how we should react. Moses pleads to God. Reminds me of Jesus. Jesus on the cross. He could have easily snapped his fingers, and the people that were nailing him to the cross, they could have been zapped up right there, burnt to a crisp with lightning. But he was looking at the bigger picture. Moses was looking at the bigger picture. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Moses is pleading because he knows that even though we come under tough trials, we may be tempted to complain. It's only temporary. It's only a symptom of what's taken place in the heart. Moses was interested in Miriam's heart. Verse 14, Then the Lord said to Moses, "If her father had but spit in her face, would she not be shamed 7 days? Let her be shut out of the camp 7 days, and afterwards she may be received again." So Miriam was shut out of the camp 7 days, and the people did not journey till Miriam was brought in again. Now there's a lot to unpack there. She was sent out of the camp for 7 days. Now, if you were to contract leprosy, you would be sent out away from everybody until you were healed. Once you were healed and you had to be declared clean from a priest, remember Moses was a priest, then you would go out of the camp for 7 days for this ritualistic time of purification. So she was inflicted with the worst case of leprosy instantly. She was also healed instantly. This shows God's compassion. So she went out of the camp 7 days. What do you think she was doing during those 7 days? You think she had time to think about what she was doing? Why she was doing what she was doing? Why she had said what she said? God's got a reason for all of these things. Now, did you notice the wording there? So Miriam was shut out of the camp 7 days, and the people did not journey till Miriam was brought in again. Maybe you go to church, maybe you see people that used to be there. Maybe you sit in the sanctuary and you see empty pews, and you just think of the person that used to be there. They chose not to come anymore. What if we refused to go anywhere until these people were brought back into the camp? What if we refused to rest until we contacted these people and let them know that we care about them? Let them know we miss them at church, miss them at Bible study. What if we refused to move on without them? Kind of get the feeling that's what Jesus did. He refused to move on from the cross without us. That's why he went to the cross. Miriam, she was brought back in again. She made the choice. She made a mistake, and she made the choice to come back also. Deuteronomy 24:9. Remember what the Lord your God did to Miriam on the way when you came out of Egypt. I think those are some very good words there. God allowed this to happen to Miriam to serve as an example. In fact, even in another book of the Bible, we're told, remember what the Lord did to Miriam. Now, this is the last that we hear of Miriam. There's nothing else recorded in her life other than her death. So while she made a mistake, evidently it seems like she got it. She got the picture. Maybe you've made a mistake. I can guarantee you I've made mistakes in the past. Suck it up, move on, cry if you have to, apologize if you need to, and let's move on. I like what this author says in the book Education, page 231, paragraph 1. The power to discriminate between right and wrong we can possess only through individual dependence upon God. Each for himself is to learn from him through his word. Our reasoning powers were given us for use, and God desires them to be exercised. Come now, let us reason together. He invites us in reliance upon him. We may have wisdom to refuse evil and choose to do good. What's the point? Everything we do is a choice. I choose to do good. I choose to do evil. I choose to complain. I choose to rejoice.